Wonder.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Coast EVs, your fortnightly fast charge on electric vehicle and infrastructure. And we're all a little bit late here today, but just starting up, so thanks for bearing with us. Just a quick reminder that you can catch us the day after in our audio-only form. If you don't want to see our smiling visages, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and all those regular haunts around lunchtime on the Thursday after we broadcast. So I'm joined, as usual, by Mr. Walter Schultze of the Network Architect channel down in the southeast, and Mr. Eric Way of the News Coolum channel over on the west coast. And we will, at some point here, have Jacob Espinoza, also known as Arty Penguin 1, and he's down in the southwest. So we have our topic tonight as regional DC fast charging. So we'll have every corner covered, and I've done the Midwest a little bit. Jacob's headed into the central area of the country, so I think we'll have good coverage to catch everybody in different parts of the country. So as always, if you're in the comments here, thanks for joining us. Let us know where you are if we don't already know, or what you're driving, anything fun you've got planned for July 4th, all that good stuff, especially if it relates to charging and DC fast charging in your region, will be super topical. And we'll come to the comments to get viewer intros shortly. But as always, we start in the news, and it being July, happy second half of the year, everybody. We have the Q2 and year-to-date EV results starting to trickle in. Ford and GM so far that I've seen. I think Tesla may have had some news coming out as well. But Eric, as the resident General Motors expert, do you want to give us what you've seen and how you're feeling about the Q2 sales, which look pretty strong from what I've saw?
Yeah, I was gonna say, are you sure you don't mean Walter?
Yeah, we'll go as the lyric starts to lead now. It used to be the Bolt that was leading that charge, but
well, I don't know. Looking at that, looking at the numbers, it looks like the Blazer might be giving the Lyric a run for its money. So yeah, I mean, it was just a summary is there. It was 21,930 deliveries in Q2, and these are customer deliveries. I've seen some people trying to say that they're dealership deliveries, but this isn't in inventory. This is actually in customers' hands. So, and that's up 34% from Q1 and up 40%, I guess, year over year in Q2. So clearly, EV sales are declining. So yeah, the big one I think was the Hummer, right? Like literally and figuratively, it's up over 70%, 71% since Q1. And then I think to me, what was the biggest thing about these numbers were that the Equinox and the Silverado are just getting started, right? So it's around 1,000 or whatever each for those, and so. I think 1,013 for the Equinox, and the Silverado. Oh, sorry, the Silverado EV was 2,196, but it's still just ramping up. So these are two. I think what you can expect to be at least as high or higher than the Blazer, right? So if you're looking at the Blazer already now ramping up to 6, almost 7,000, Lyric doing almost 7,000 or over 7,000. The Silverado and the Equinox should just blow past both of those. So if GM is right and they're not running into any sort of constraints, I think we could easily see a Q3 that's double Q2, which would be over 40,000 units sold in a single quarter, which I think would be a record for GM even in the heyday of their Bolt EVs. So that's good news coming out of them. And then we saw some from others. I'll pass it back to you, Steve, our Hyundai Kia expert.
You know what? That is the one that I'm not caught up with. I saw the Ford ones. Personally, I was pretty excited about those because the Mach-E was bouncing back at 12.6K, and that was 52% of that. I mean, they had some strong discounts. in Q2. So clearly they've juiced sales that way, and the Lightning had a similar kind of, up. It was at 7,900 in Q2. So it's quite a strong roster, I think. But especially on GM side, I mean, it's easy to look at Ford and say, well, the Mach-E was strong, great. That's like 52% of their sales that quarter. Lightning was at about a third. So, but then you've only really got the E-Transit after that at 14%, and not really, as you say, like when you look at GM, we talked about this a little bit last time, you see the roster just growing. And when you look at the Equinox EV, as you say, potentially going on to really blow the Blazer EV away, even though the Blazer is coming out strong. That's, if Ford can only lean into those discounts so much before the market is tapped out for kind of Mach-E in its current generation. Maybe the Lightning's got a little more wiggle room, but it's good to see them on strong, but it really is hard to look past GM.
Well, in that recent interview with Jim Farley, right, he keeps reiterating that Ford is the number 2 EV maker in the United States, and it's like, well, I really don't know how long that's going to keep up between GM and, like I said, Hyundai and Kia. Even without the tax credits, they're just tearing it up. So,
yep. I mean, the Ioniq 5 continues. Ioniq 6 has come out great guns as well. But I think we were seeing that again. They've lent into leasing a lot. But with the Ioniq 5 coming out of the US facilities and getting that tax credit, I don't think it'll actually juice the sales that much more. But, they're in a good position again to really start widening that roster and kind of make that sales base bigger and have more to kind of lean into. Even if they have some issues with one or the other models or tap out demand, then they've got a lot of others to kind of move into. But Walter, for GM side, the Lyric was kind of the standard bearer, top of the pile.
Best quarter ever for the Lyric.
We hinted at it in May. We kind of knew that. We hoped that would continue, and it obviously did, because that kind of came out and juiced their quarter. What are you thinking about GM's position and Cadillac specifically as a brand?
Yeah, I think Jim Farley's LinkedIn interview, or article, I forgot how that was publicized, is telling, in my opinion, that he's very concerned about the momentum that GM has built up, the inertia that they have on their EV portfolio. Because if you look at what Ford did, if we rolled the clock back, they pumped the brakes and pressed the pause button on their battery factory, and they kind of pushed their releases out. GM was just kind of quietly going about business and sticking to their guns. I really think the kill shot, although they're lining up with the Equinox and the Silverado, which are both really going to be potentially market leaders, also the GMC Sierra EV Denali and the GMC Sierra EV on top of those. And I'll talk about the Hummer in just a second. The kill shot really is the Bolt V2. I think is just going to, there's nothing that is even, the closest thing to the Bolt V2 is the Leaf. And there's other automakers that are queuing up something for a low cost entry level EV, but that's really competing against the Equinox. The Bolt is in a completely different class, and that's really making the concept of low cost electrification of transportation for new car buyers a completely different story. You have a reliable car that's low cost, that's roomy, produced in the United States, that's got the $7,500 tax credit if it still exists when the Bolt V2 comes out. That's really going to be a difficult. I don't think anyone has an answer for that. And if they sell those things like I would imagine they would, I just was in downtown Charlotte today, and the city of Charlotte has gone all Bolt for their traffic parking enforcement teams. So it was wildly successful before the stop sale and the re-engineering, and in the Bolt V2, I just really think is going to be a terrific market segment winner. And I don't even know what segment it would be in. I don't know what it would even compete against. But I think Ford is really concerned that they're pumping the brakes at the time when they did could have a problematic outcome now that GM is basically just reinventing the market, saying that there is no problem with the sale of EVs. And here's our portfolio. Does anyone want them? And the answer is, yeah, people want them. Who wouldn't want a more reliable car that is fun to drive and filled with new technology and not that expensive and available for a $7,500 tax credit. So I think GM has really played their cards well. And here we are sailing through 24, and really 2025, I think, is going to be the year that GM's numbers really start to significantly increase. And if the demand is there that we think is there, it could be troubling even for Tesla, the amount of production that GM can start throwing into the domestic market.
For sure, and the Bolt even had its little swan song. There may even be some residual units creeping into July sales, but they're still above 1,000, right, for the residual 2023 models. So still, pulling its weight even when it's on a hiatus there.
Yeah, and I mean, and I was going to say, and just to circle back, and talking about Ford, I think one of the things where they also are getting hit on the other side is with Rivian too, and so Rivian's deliveries are up as well. And I don't think that's just the R1T. That's the. It turns out that Americans want a 3-row SUV. So the R1S is selling really well. And then, like I said, Steve, do you lump Kia in with Hyundai, or do you just say the EV9 is doing great too? Right? Like, I think Kia, they're what, 18,000 sales in Q2. So they're just right behind GM. And like, I think that goes back to what we said. I think the biggest issue with Kia is just the breadth of their offerings, right? It's not what they're offering is great. Everybody loves the product. Everybody who buys the Kia EVs loves them. But there's just a few options, right? There are only a few things to choose from. So,
but again,
yeah,
they have a roadmap, right? I mean, we've talked about the EV3 briefly, and whether Walter's point where that sits, alongside a kind of upgraded Bolt EV, that adds another piece to their lineup. Hyundai has the smaller EV coming out eventually, but also still has that kind of EV9 variant, in the Ioniq line coming up, which is bound to be popular. If we take the record sales for the Ioniq 5 as anything to go by. So, I mean, those are the brands that we touched upon all of this last time, just the ones that have the most compelling rosters, but those are certainly the ones that seem to be, moving in that direction. But as kind of Walter pointed out, there's just a lack of. Ford has that pipeline. It's trying to build up those more affordable EVs. It'll get there, but it does seem now like that, the ones that were quietly going about it, that were just saying, no, we're not slowing down here. We're continuing along the path, staying the course. And now they're kind of starting to reap the rewards of those positive headlines.
And I think the Hummer numbers also are telling, because really what it competes against is the Cybertruck. I don't think it has another competitor. And the Cybertruck has been suffering some bad press and reviews as of late. So I think the Hummer numbers are a direct result of that, where people are looking for an over-the-top, voracious option in order to sink a lot of cash into, and the Hummer is becoming a more attractive option just to get away from the bad press.
Yeah, and I saw my first Hummer EV live on the road, actually, just the other day. I think he saw that I was a Bolt EV, so apparently he had to go faster on the freeway. But
that's a hell of a drag race.
Well, I wasn't racing. I had cruise control set, but I was just going to say, so at what point do we get to just kick back and tell all of the EV going bankrupt, FUD sales numbers are down? When do we get to look to those people and say, we told you so?
I think Q4 is a good time to do that, around a Christmas present.
Oh, okay. We have to wait that long?
We'll just build it up slowly. We'll have a quarterly party on this. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, a nice note to kind of have on the news, rather than bankruptcies and the kind of sideshows of some of the other headlines. But let's go through the viewer introductions here and say good evening and good afternoon to everybody. Jay Donaldson, Ohio Bolt driver, another Bolt in the ranks. Very glad to have you. Thanks for joining. Brian Ribby over in I don't know if he is in Minnesota at the moment. You may still be traveling. If you are, I hope you're having a wonderful time. Happy third indeed. Todd Capers over in, there we go, recently relocated to Minnesota from Florida. So he's up in Brian's home area in a Marquee. Good evening. Congratulations on the move. I hope you're enjoying the summer. Winter will be a little different, but I'm sure you'll cope. Unless you're going back, of course. Robert Brigham, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Scott Thomas, who I will see tomorrow. I'm over in upstate New York at the moment, around the Finger Lakes region. Looking forward to catching up and hearing all the headlines on the Mach-E GT performance that he's recently upgraded to over in Syracuse. Paul in very hot Bakersfield, only 108 degrees. Well, yeah, I'm sorry if I'm sweating here. I've not got the air conditioning on because it's too noisy. So, yes, I feel your pain. Not quite that hard, though. We have RLH Marines. Good evening. Happy Independence Day. And let's see. Don in San Diego. Thank you for joining us. Paul Matthews, beam me up. Indeed. Beam you up to... He's disappearing into the roadway there. Let's see. And good afternoon, actually, where you are, to Crazy Postman. Feel immediately challenged if a bolt chose to pass me. We're a plucky bunch. I still count myself amongst the ranks, even though I retired some time ago. In Savannah, Georgia, RLH Marines, Electrified Light Vehicles joins us with his EV6 GT line from Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. Another one of the Kia EV sales. Thanks for making the mark. Leonard, hello from a Circle K Charger in Wytheville, Virginia. I bet Walter has reviewed that at some point or another. And last but by no means least, hello, Mark Fitzpatrick from Columbus, Ohio, home to a lot of Nevi action right now. So let's just make sure I don't miss any comments that we had on the news topic of Q2 sales. So Scott says, here's an example of Ford's discounts. 2023 Mach-E GT Performance for $4,000 less than the 2021 Mach-E Premium with extended battery. Absolutely. It's there's always that kind of first 6 months to 12 months where you're at a premium. I think Walter got in on a good deal with his Lyric, but a lot of the times there's that dealer markup. It's always there, but I think more and more we're starting to see that period very curtailed, right? So the EV9 was probably pretty high priced for a little while, but it didn't take too long for those discounts to start kicking in and mass sales to be much more compelling than trying to squeeze a little bit extra out of people who just wanted the hot new product. Robert is loving his 2021 Volt, but it stranded him in Durango, Colorado 2 days ago, and software upgrade shut it down. And battery got replaced. Oh, okay. Well, that's weird. That's one of those long-term kind of battery replacements. So yeah, at least you will get your new battery. But it sucks that they kind of went that way with the kind of 2020 plus models, right? I kind of exited out on that when I handed back our lease, but it sucks that it was a software update in the end and not replaced batteries unless you really, have that issue which you had by the time. But
well, and I mean, I kind of look at that as that sort of, it's a safety first, right? It's, we've detected an issue. We're not going to let you drive anymore, but it's inconvenient, but at least you get a new battery out of it.
That battery replacement and warranty reset is a sweet kind of piece. Absolutely. So yeah, great to say hello to everybody. Thank you for joining us, as I say, especially on the eve of a holiday. Just one quick note on that being up in the upstate New York region and with Scott's comments there. Quick plug for this event. We're over in the Finger Lakes right now, and this Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. A bunch of EV nerds and the local EV club will be from Rochester, New York, will be in the Finger Lakes Welcome Center in Geneva, New York. So there's just to the right of this where you see that tree, there's free charging, so you can plug in, get some free juice for the car, and then come inside and have a little bit of fun on the lake. Beautiful area. I've been over to check it out a couple of times and enjoying it. So if you're in the region, come on over. We'll say hello.
If I leave now, I might be able to make it.
You may well. You may need to pick up one of those Hyundai or Kia models, though, to speed up the charging a little bit. But there you go. Alrighty, so yeah, thank you everybody for joining us, and let me bring up our guest for the evening, returning guest, Jacob Espinoza down in New Mexico, also known on YouTube and X as RTPenguin1, and that's his channel, that's his X handle, and anywhere else you find him, that will most likely be what you'll see him putting out there. And on your license plate too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's abbreviation for that on the plate. Yeah.
Good stuff. So welcome, and this is good timing because we are, as I say, talking about DC fast charging and regional coverage this evening. So Jacob is down in the kind of fourth corner, if you like, if you consider Eric not quite northwest, but we'll give you that with Northern California. Me up in the northeast, even still now. Walter down in the southeast, and Jacob's down in the southwest, but travels pretty broadly. Which I'd love to hear, Jacob, where you've been. It's been a while since we spoke to you, and it'd be great to know what you're seeing, how the DC fast charging in your region is performing for your Kia EV6. Anything you'd like to share, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, it's been a pretty wild few months. So my biggest trip has been to the Eclipse. I went to San Antonio. That was a multi-day event to cross West Texas. And over there was a lot more charging than I'm used to there in the San Antonio Metro. So I was just going from charger to charger. Didn't really have to, because I didn't get a hotel with charging. There were not that many AC chargers there in San Antonio, but it's, especially with the speeds being a lot lower, being in a metro area, you don't have to worry as much about the charging and the range and all that. But definitely going to San Antonio and coming back, you only do have Electrify America, and Tesla only has the old version 2s. That was part of their, I think it was the second cross-country corridor they energized, Interstate 10. So that's approaching, it's from 2017, so 7 or 8 years old now. So I did that trip back in April, and then a month ago I went to central New Mexico to see if there was anything going on with the sites along Interstate 40 from Albuquerque to Gallup, but there wasn't any progress yet, unfortunately, for that. And over here in New Mexico, it's been pretty slow going. There hasn't been that many construction changes in status or new sites going online.
Right. And you, I think last time we spoke, you had quite an extensive experience with Francis Energy. That was one of the names that was starting to come up a little more. I assume not a whole lot of action on the construction front for them, other than the places you've already been and the sketchy reliability that we talked about before.
Yeah, a little bit. They're starting to pivot towards a different hardware provider, SK Signet, but still it's only the 150 kilowatt standalone units, all-in-ones. They should really do a power share, but they're moving to that slowly at 2 sites. The first site I visited with that one, it might have had a site power limit, but yeah, because it was supposed to be 150, but it seemed to have a limit of maybe up to 130, had like an amperage limit or something weird. With that, and they finally fixed that problematic site there in Carrizozo. They literally moved one of the chargers from Vaughn to Carrizozo. But yeah, other than those 2 sites being refurbished or, new hardware replacement, and then one went online in eastern New Mexico, there hasn't been anything there. New site. There was one leaked through their app. I forgot to get a screenshot of it, but it's a planned site there in Cuba, New Mexico, halfway in between Farmington and the Albuquerque area. That one's going at a chicken restaurant, but that one has no signs of progress yet, unfortunately. So that might come in a year, because some of the sites that showed up on their app last year took like a whole year to actually be energized and put in the ground. So not much yet there from Francis, and not really anything on their NEVI awards.
Yeah, they did start to. They've just started activating the NEVI sites in Ohio. Francis won, so I think this was almost a year to the day, actually. Maybe just under. They've squeezed in, but they have one for anyone who's over there in Rydersville, Ohio, and then I think that was at a Casey's, and then the other one just went live today, actually, in Myersville, I think it is, and that was at a Dollar General. So buy all your cheap goods as you pay not a premium for electrons, actually, which we'll get onto later. They're in the reasonable realm of pricing. But our topic for tonight is DC fast charging and regional coverage, as we have the Four Corners kind of here, and some of us have delved into the middle of the country as well. We wanted to take a look at, there seems to be something of a patchwork, and certainly in NEVI that has kind of come out, but that's more down to the individual states and who's willing to kind of accelerate ahead and who's kind of lagging behind. But even in the when we have conversations with folks like Jacob, who are in an area where there is more limited coverage and your travels tend to take you only to Electrify Americas, which tend to be outdated, or some of the 50 kilowatt kind of lower double digits challenging hardware, which is getting old and long in the tooth now. We don't maybe have such good coverage compared to some of the coasts and some of the east-west regions that come up. So we wanted to take a look at that and dive a little bit deeper into which regions are pulling ahead, which are still maybe lagging behind a little bit, and then what kind of challenges we see in each of our regions as we go. So we're going to do a little round robin here, and as we go along, anything that's in your region, we have the benefit of very knowledgeable viewers in the comments as well. So let us know what you're seeing, which networks are kind of pulling their weight, which are having problems, and who you have hopes for. But Eric, we were going to start with you up there in Northern California, and the kind of networks, pricing, cost, coverage that you're seeing.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to start by saying, I noticed, Jacob, you've been kind of doing the same thing that I've been doing, just running around to all the pilot flying J's and seeing if anything's happening. And, no real progress yet. We know of the one in California in Weed on I-5, but that's so far the only GM Energy EVgo pilot flying J that I've seen actually undergoing construction and development. And I kind of wanted for this because, I have a pretty broad spectrum, right, Steve, in terms of being in Northern California. Within range, I can get down to the Bay Area in Sacramento in just an afternoon. And those are hotbeds for development. We've seen networks growing left and right. And I mean, Electrify America is putting in another 14 stall, 350 kilowatt location just across the street from a previous location with 6 DC fast chargers in Rockland. And then, of course, EVgo is also going gangbusters cities like Sacramento and San Francisco. But I kind of wanted to go back to my roots, because what started me on this channel is how little support Northern California gets, right? Because people forget, just because we're in California, they think, oh, you're EV Mecca, everybody supports you. And even CARB had to call out Electrify America on how it was that all of the disadvantaged communities that they were supporting just happened to be on freeways, right? So that leaves a huge swath of the northern state with a lot of disadvantaged communities, a lot of lower income communities, no Electrify America chargers whatsoever, right? And we're still at the point where if you have an EV that maybe only gets about 200 miles of freeway range, you might have to hit nearly every single Electrify America charger going north on I-5 from Sacramento just to get to Oregon. So it's that sparse in their coverage. And so the network that I really wanted to call out, because they were there first, they provided the most coverage, and they've just been consistent all the way along, is ChargePoint. And I feel like they're kind of like the unsung heroes of Northern California. Even when I first got my Bolt EV, if you wanted to travel to Oregon in a CCS EV, the only option was 24 kilowatt charge points, like literally nothing else. And even to this day, if you want to take Highway 395 north from Reno to get into Oregon, and you only want to use public chargers, the only option is a ChargePoint level 2. Literally nothing else for 300, 350, almost 400 miles. So ChargePoint has been there. Now, one of the criticisms a lot of people have had, one, that they're slow. They're the paired CPE 250s that used to be the Tritium V-fills, and they're really slow in upgrading it. And right now we only have one Express Plus unit that's gone in. So the speed is one thing that people criticize a lot. And then the pricing is the other thing. They're the first ones that really hit that 50 cent per kilowatt hour. And then it can spike even up from that 60 plus cents per kilowatt hour based on time of use. But these were their basically non-subsidized. These were owned by ChargePoint. and they're hosted somewhere else. And so it kind of gives you that idea of what it actually costs without subsidizing the power, especially in California. So that 50 to 60 cents per kilowatt hour is kind of just the going rate if you want a DC fast charge away from home at this point. And then, but the biggest reason too I wanted to call ChargePoint out is they seem to be the one that's primarily supporting smaller businesses too. So there are a lot of these ChargePoint chargers. There's this Yak's restaurant in Dunsmuir that is a way cooler stop than it has any business being, right? You have a charger right behind the restaurant in this picnic area under the trees. Just so much fun. And then they have the Vittles restaurant too, where you're charging literally under solar panels in Red Bluff. So they have these small chargers at small local businesses, and it's just like those are the entities that need to be supported to really get EVs having traction as these local small businesses. So I'm going to give ChargePoint all the props in the world. They've done what they needed. They just need to, like I said, start expanding their sites a little bit with their newer hardware, and start inviting some of these faster charging EVs in. And I mean, I think they could be a force to be reckoned with. So, but everybody else is just hit or miss. EVgo, not really much in Northern California. All of these other small EV Gateway, EVCS, a lot of these smaller ones, they're just struggling to get any traction. And then a lot of times the sites that they're putting in are the equivalent of the sites that ChargePoint put in 6 to 7 years ago. So it's a little bit underwhelming. And then, of course, Tesla hasn't really opened many of their superchargers. We only have like 3 or 4 Magic Dock sites in the entire state. So, yeah, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Gotcha. Remind me to come back to you and ask you about some of the ones that you covered, the kind of startups and the EV ranges of the world, that kind of thing, once we go through everybody here, because I'd be interested in seeing how you feel about, California as a startup location for a CPO and building out from there, with the volume, but also with the competition.
Right.
But yeah, let me move on to Jacob. And you did address this in the comments, but just so everyone has the benefit of the audio, for Jacob, how are the Allsup sites developing in your area?
Yeah, so it looks like the Allsup sites, they were partnering with Francis Energy, and some of the new partnerships looks like this is going to Red E Charging. And they're going to be using different equipment. Those are for the NEVI sites, but I'm assuming that some of the non-NEVI sites might also be moving to a partnership with Ready, and they're going to use Autel units, not all at once, but a cabinet dispenser, 360 kilowatt, and then also some battery backup with ADS tech. So they're pivoting towards that instead of partnering with Francis, it looks like.
Gotcha. It's interesting to see Ready coming up. I first heard of them in Michigan when they were using old VFIL units, and it was pretty ropey, but they may be another one who just start to find the right hardware provider and hit their stride. But what else are you, as your regional kind of feel, after Eric's kind of counterpoint with how California is struggling in some senses to be a place for startup CPOs and the kind of networks that are trying to grow. How do you feel your area and beyond, as you branch out into charging in different states, is set up to kind of be the next wave of or a place for them to expand, for the next wave of networks to kind of build into New Mexico and beyond?
Yeah, well, I think the NEVI funds should hopefully help. Also, I was looking at some of the applications for NEVI that weren't accepted, and that might be promising if some of the larger companies also want to devote their own funds to that. Love's Travel Stops was in the documents, and they were going to use ChargePoint Express Plus, and then Travel Centers of America, they were going to use the Alpitronic all-in-one hyperchargers, the 400 kilowatt. So it remains to be seen if they're still going to do that with their own private funds, or if they're going to wait for round 2 of NEVI for the small gaps on the interstate or stuff like that. But I think I would still say I'm most optimistic for Tesla's pivot to full version 4, because they have a lot of sites coming soon in New Mexico, especially along the interstate corridors, and both the Interstate 40 and Interstate 10 corridor are only their old version 2 superchargers. So I still would hold out hope that they would have the newer hardware and just the right site design stuff. Once they move to full version 4, and I think some of the pause that we've seen is they're still trying to move to full version 4, and it really can't be that hard, because they have their own Cybertruck that needs 1,000-volt support, and then the other automakers, especially Lucid and Hyundai, Kia, but also half of the GM products, the Ultium, they need 800-volt to charge at their max speed, and I don't think they're going to open up the network to the higher voltage vehicles and just have them at a low charge rate, because people will be complaining and there'll just be a lot of misdirected complaints too. So I think they're just waiting for that, and once we see that, hopefully at the end of this year, they should hopefully take off, because those old sites some are approaching 10 years old, the ones on Interstate 40.
Right, I guess that makes your area kind of a potential for really to lead that V4 expansion. I mean, aside from the Texas link, which obviously is a piece of it in Tesla's HQ, if they've got those older sites, they would be good candidate sites. Plus the NEVI funding, which NEVI hasn't necessarily been that spread for Tesla. Some places like your Loves or your Pilot Flying J's have a pretty good representation across the NEVI field, but Tesla's been pretty sporadic. They win a few here and there, and then some states just go all in. Do you hope to see that? Do you think that, are you kind of bullish on V4 as a pure V4 for not just my vehicle, because I don't think they really give a monkeys about Hyundai Kia, to be honest, but I think they do care about Cybertruck owners, and I think they do want the Tesla supercharger network to be the premium place to charge your $100,000 Cybertruck, right? That just seems such a weird scenario that Tesla hasn't been in for as long as I can remember, where to get the best out of that truck, they have to go and charge on someone else's hardware. That's surely not a tenable position for Tesla over the long term.
Yeah, and I also hope that the version 3 sites, they'll be able to retrofit or upgrade them. So best case scenario, they would just need to do a cable replacement, which would probably mean they just move to the version 4 dispensers to have a longer cable. And maybe they would have to do, depending on how new the power cabinets are, maybe, I don't know if they could add additional cabinets, but they might be able to add new modules or change the firmware to just output 1,000 volts, because they can already go between each cabinet 1,000 volts. So I do hope that they go towards that. And kind of on the later topics, they do have the best pricing with the subscription in my state, especially. It is even cheaper than Electrify America at many sites.
Mm-hmm. And moving over to the southeast of the country, Walter, I can only imagine very positive on what's happening in your area. It's really shifted to be not only the home of some of these networks and the hardware manufacturers, but Pilot Flying J kind of leapt out of there. You've got your racetracks, your Buc-ee's with Mercedes-Benz. I guess it's hard to know where to start, but take it where you want to take it for your region.
Yeah, if I can, Leonard is at the Wytheville Circle K, which is immediately across the interstate from the Pilot Flying J, where you can get a really good dessert apple crisp. I recommend it highly. So if you want to cross the interstate, it's really delicious. But that intersection of Interstate 81 and 77 is pretty heavily traveled, and it's a great spot. If he is continuing up 81, it's a route that I just recently took, and literally every Pilot Flying J I stopped at was either open or under construction. And it really surprised me, because there's 3 that I was unsure about. One of them I pulled up, and there it was, the owl sign and a fence going up. And it's almost like you could just randomly, over here, you could just randomly pick a Pilot Flying J, pull into it, and there's the owl banner sitting around a chain link fence somewhere, because it is all under construction. Literally every single Pilot Flying J that was targeted as on the map for coming soon in 2024 is now either open or confirmed under construction. Just in the past. So if he's going up there, Raphine, Virginia is the next one that he'll hit, and he can stop by there. That one's under construction. And then Winchester, Virginia. I'm sorry, before that, there is Harrisonburg, Virginia. That one is open. Winchester, Virginia is open. It was under construction when I got there, but it's now open. And then up past the border into Pennsylvania, you have the one in southern Pittsburgh that just opened as well. The state of Georgia, well, let me talk about the state of Ohio, because it's kind of a done deal. Basically, every Pilot Flying J that was listed with round 1 NEVI awards is now confirmed either under construction or open. State of Georgia, we're finding new Pilot Flying J's coming under construction. It feels like at least once a week. They're just really clipping along. Tifton, Georgia. There's another one in central Georgia, just recently new spotted under construction. Multiple sites also already opened. So Pilot Flying J is just really spending a lot of coin. So that Fancy Gap, Wytheville, Circle K, Pilot Flying J location that Leonard currently is at is right on what's called the Blue Ridge Escarpment, which is a ridge line that goes up kind of through the southeast into Virginia. And he'll be following that on 81 if that's the route he's taking. And every Pilot Flying J there is under construction. But as far as the southeast, it, as you say, is becoming kind of a hub for this new national push for DC fast charger builds. We've got the regional headquarters for Circle K in Charlotte. We've got FPL, which I think is an honorable mention. You should see what they're doing in the state of Florida. It's really remarkable. There's a couple of sites that are important in the swampland of northern Florida where there's not a lot of people, but there are a lot of interstates, like Interstate 75 and Interstate 10. Interstate 10 starts in Jacksonville, Florida. And if you look at the mileage of Interstate 10, most of it is the state of Florida because it crosses the entire panhandle of Florida, which is a long stretch of road. If anyone's driven 10, and I've gone a good portion of it, it's mostly Florida. And FPL is doing a pretty good job of building out sites along that I-10 corridor with not just one charger, not just two charger, but the one at Live Oaks, which is close to the 7710 interchange, has 4 chargers. So they really went all in there. So also there's another one in Kissimmee. EV Connect has got a couple new chargers near the Disney World area. Disney World is pretty heavily getting built up in DC fast chargers. And there's a company called GPM Investments, which I mentioned on my last update, that is doing CPE 250 pairs at their convenience stores labeled Roadrunner. And they've just opened, they've just opened 3 recently. So the C-store industry is going strong. As you mentioned, Racetrack. QT also is throwing their hat in the ring. And then there's the large ones that we're still waiting for them to start pivoting, which is Walmart, and it was mentioned Love's as well. So plenty of going on in the Southeast, no lack of activity. And I almost feel guilty for the amount of feast or famine that I'm hearing in other areas of the country, because around here it is Katie bar the door. There are DC fast chargers going in all over the place.
And I want to remember to come back to you on thoughts on Alabama's NEVI funds, which about more than half of them went to Love's. And I was looking over the map and where they are, kind of bookmarking some of those sites, and realized how far along in that state some of the Pilot Flying J's and some of the racetracks even. I think Racetrack did actually get one, but it's got to be galling for some of those that led the charge a little bit to look at it and see now down the road some of their competition, like your Loves, are getting those significant grants just for being laggards in a way. Not that Pilot Flying J hasn't made it up in other states, but it's an interesting kind of contrast when you see how close some of those sites that just got announced were to existing Pilot Flying J's or new construction.
There's definitely waves going on, and as you say, they were early winners of round ones, but that's starting to pay off because some states that were kind of slow after announcements to actually start releasing the funds are now starting to release. So as we all know, Ohio was first to throw their hat in the ring to actually start paying for these sites, but just recently Utah, who has Pilot Flying J's on their NEVI sites, started to spend money too, and we're getting indications of builds going on there as well. So as you say, it's a bit of a patchwork, and there's ebbs and flows through these NEVI awards. And someone mentioned about how NEVI after the presidential election might be put on hold, and I disagree. If we have a change in the White House, the law doesn't change. What may change is that the law might not be enforced. So states which wish to reallocate NEVI funds for other purposes besides DC fast chargings might be allowed to. But states that want to put in DC fast chargers are still going to have access to those funds. So it'll be a state-by-state decision. And the only thing that can really change is the enforcement of the law. But the law, anyone who wants access to those funds, you have to actually change the law in order for that to be disrupted.
Yeah, I'm planning a deeper dive into that either as the next Nevi update or the kind of 3.5 because it's my third update on the funding itself. But I've read a lot more recently about how it can't really be stopped. The states can certainly slow down as some of them have wanted to do. We talked about Wyoming, but you've got that they tend to be those mountain states and kind of the north. The very states that we want to cover certainly, but states that could be covered by the likes of Pilot Flying J, by the truck stops, and then you can just kind of drive on through. And now you've got like the likes of Alabama and Kentucky. There's a lot of states that are perceived to be kind of red states that you would think would then slow down, but they've actually got they realize how much investment is going their way. So I think they'll just be the sheer groundswell of more than 2/3, almost 3/4 of the states forging ahead with the program is just going to make the other ones, if they do decide to drag their heels, look a little bit silly. And as more and more EVs get sold, more and more people are going to start saying, why didn't you spend this money that was on the table?
There is backlash right now in the state of Florida for that specific purpose.
Well,
there's an uprising saying, hey, governor, release these funds to us. And I know I'm consuming a lot of airtime, but just very quickly, also in the Southeast, I'm seeing a ton of activity from Electrify America. And I kind of thought they were winding down expansion, but that is not the case.
I thought the number was, I thought they were looking for a 25% increase in their network size this year.
Okay. Yeah.
The problems they've had.
I've got lots of builds that are spotted.
Yeah, I think one thing is that you've highlighted in your kind of weekly updates with the DCFC database that they don't really update very regularly, so you have to kind of keep their app, or you'd have to just know that those things are coming or follow them on X. But there's once they got through that round of upgrades on the stations, although they really do have to hit the middle of the country, because talking about regional disparities, it's not good where those stations haven't been upgraded. It was done on the coast, it was done in some of the major metropolitan markets, but they're trying to catch up now in those locations which are almost very key. They're more key than the ones around Boston, which frustrate the suburban commuters or whatever, but really don't matter in the grand scheme of things because there's somewhere else for them to go. You're talking about these places in the middle of a state that has no other fast charging for 100 miles.
Exactly, yeah.
Those are the ones that need to be reliable and upgraded first, preferably to as they have done actually down in Bedford, Pennsylvania, which brings me on to the Northeast a little bit. They moved that site, which was a real key kind of hub for people going across from the north or across Pennsylvania in almost any direction, really. They expanded that from 4, when it always had lines, to 6 now of the newer, I think it's BTC power down there. But they're still going to have lines there, but this will turn things over quickly. They won't have outages. And I've seen it working in some of the locations around me in Boston where people are, and we'll get on to pricing later, but they're starting to have free plans expire, so they're not as busy. Their prices went up earlier this year, so they're not, people who were previously maybe going because it was per minute, or there were some of these vagaries of the plans that made it cheap to charge there. It's not cheap anymore. This is one of the more expensive options in the area. So you're starting to see those locations become not only more reliable, but just less trafficked because they're now more of an expensive game in town. But to kind of really cap off on the Northeast, it does feel like a patchwork up here. You've got the states like I'm in at the moment, New York, where you're essentially everything's covered. We spoke to John Markowitz earlier this year about the Evolve New York network, kind of stepping in to cover some of those gaps, and they've done a great job. Massachusetts is odd. It's just a really strange state it's kind of in that California vibe of, it's got a lot of adoption. It's got all the people that want to travel, but some of the areas are just, poorly served. They're either left with old equipment, poorly reliability, things that just, they don't really have a statewide strategy, it seems. And in some areas they've moved very slowly. Other states like Maine do a great job, other than they've got a big state to cover and there's not a lot of people up there by the borders, but they've certainly made steps to get upgraded sites, smart people in some of the companies up there. Revision Energy, one that I would call out, doing a great job of site selection and finding places where those stations really need to go to enable travel up to Canada, to the tourist areas of Maine and that kind of thing, then contrasted to New Hampshire, which is slowly starting to catch up, but has that kind of EVs don't matter attitude around the turn of 2020, and then starting to realize now, crap, we've got to catch up. We need to be able to get people to the White Mountains. We need to be able to get people through to, Vermont and onwards. So you have kind of an odd patchwork in the New England states, but then Walter kind of talked about the Midwest, which I also hit quite often, and they've done a great job. Michigan has always had some pretty solid travel plans and strategy to put in. That's aging charge point hardware now, maybe, but those are easier to upgrade. You can get to almost everywhere except maybe the Upper Peninsula, which is a little bit of a challenge still, but they've always had good coverage. Ohio, as we know, has led Navy very well. West Virginia, it's one of those that, it's certainly patchwork, that right up there with Wyoming as a laggard state on pretty much every front. But other than that, I think the Northeast and the Midwest in general is either good already or starting to really push ahead. So, I don't have problems with it, but there are certainly these patches where we really do need to start getting those Navy funds or some of these new players to really start to pull their weight, which takes us a bit longer than the regional piece than I wanted, but I think we're well covered, and we still have plenty of time. So let me jump to the comments quickly. There's quite a lot here, so I will have to catch up. Where did we get to? I would say a quick good evening to Chase at Grid Connections. Again, still knocking out some great interviews. We talked about Eric's interview, what was one of the last ones, and I listened to that on the way over to New York. Again, lots of good insights there. He's also spoken to Quincy, who I was at Electric Era, I think, one of the battery-backed solutions, and they're doing some great things, so definitely worth checking that conversation out. Leonard over in Oklahoma has been seeing no movement at the Tulsa Flying J, but Roland, Oklahoma is definitely coming along. So definitely excited to see everybody updating on different Pilot Flying J locations, which are obviously the kind of cream of the crop in terms of amenities. Let's see. AB over in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Only non-Tesla, non-Rivian chargers within 100 miles of charge points, just kind of backing up Eric's Northwest representation for charge point. Ron Valade asks about dealer charges. I'm going to get onto this in a little bit, but definitely I think it's a little bit of a sleeping giant in some ways. There's a mixed bag for sure, but I've used dealership charging to get up here in some of the areas of Pennsylvania, which were not so well covered, and they made a difference. And this one from Leonard saying, cool to see all-toll units. That's what kind of got me up to where I am now today. So I'm definitely on board with that. And then back to Jacob's area quickly. Robert Brigham says, Farmington, New Mexico popped up on the EV map when the Buick dealer opened up public 24/7 EV Connect site. Is that one you're familiar with, Jacob?
Not in particular. No, I usually don't track dealership chargers because a lot of them here in the West are behind closed gates and
Right.
stuff like that. So, yeah.
Okay, and I think if I've missed anything in the comments, I apologize, but there's a lot there. If I miss anything, I will. Let's see. Is West Virginia still lagging? Yes. Sorry, it's I still don't find any, and you got your answer right after there. Yes, West Virginia is practically a black hole of charging infrastructure.
Unless you're in a Tesla.
True. They've that's pretty much true of, although I'm sure there are some gaps. Obviously, Jacob has kind of highlighted the aging infrastructure in his area, and there are some places you can't quite get. But essentially, usually the exception is that there are older Tesla superchargers at the very least. And we have Belton family, late hello from Indiana, Volvo C40. Great to have you. Thank you. And Brad Cook joining us as well. If you have any questions on certain regions, definitely excited to hear, what you're seeing in your area, which pieces of the DC fast charging map are being filled in, which are still a big problem, as we know. West Virginia definitely on that list. Wyoming. Walter touched on Utah, which I think is an interesting one because we wanted to move to cost a little bit. One of the things that Walter's tracked in his Pilot Flying J update certainly is the price per kilowatt hour of some of those stations, because they're quite a wide variety and some gaps. Definitely here in the Northeast, we have the unfortunate distinction of being the most expensive stations over in New York, parts of New York. But one of the pieces that I wanted to cover on that, and maybe Walter, you can speak to this, is The Rocky Mountain Power sites are at 45 cents per kilowatt hour, which is nowadays pretty reasonable. And they're also going down to 40 cents per kilowatt hour for residential customers who are using Rocky Mountain Power. And it kind of overlaps with the Evolve New York sites, which are trying to keep, as John, when we talked to him, said they're at 45 cents per kilowatt hour. When you compare that to an Electrify America station regularly, which, you know, a lot of Evolve New York sites are Electrify America, they tend to be 56 cents or 64 cents per kilowatt hour, you know, off plan pricing if you're not a Pass Plus member. So I think that's an interesting piece of the pricing variation, but maybe we want to go around quickly here and say, you know, what we're seeing in terms of high-end pricing, low-end pricing in your region, and where that kind of sits in the wider scheme of things. Is it going to get too expensive to DC fast charge for all but trips here? Let me pass that to Jacob quickly a second.
Yeah, so in my area, a lot of the pricing is pretty high. All the Francis in my states are at 59 cents kilowatt hour, and a lot of the co-ops installed their own in northern New Mexico. Those are only 50 kilowatt units. Those ones are also charging around 60 cents kilowatt hour, so it is quite high, and those ones offer no discounts or anything like that. And then Electrify America is just the typical, it's either 56 or 64 cents without a subscription, but then with the subscription it goes down to 42 or 48. So I'd say that on the lower end it's in the 40s, and then average, it seems like, unfortunately, is near 60 cents kilowatt hour now, unless you have Tesla. That one's a little bit lower. I think it just maxes out at 50 in the 50 cents kilowatt hour with the Tesla if you don't have the subscription. And I guess if you are a Tesla driver, if you do have the subscription, maybe in the mid 40s. So it's on par with Electrify America, if not a little bit cheaper.
Gotcha. Eric, how about you? What's California pricing looking like right now?
Yeah, actually, it sounds like, just from what I've seen of the superchargers, because obviously I still can't use them, but from what I've seen of the superchargers in Electrify America, it sounds fairly similar to Jacob out there in New Mexico. I would say in California, though, if you see, it's the baseline you're going to be paying is somewhere between 45 and 50 cents per kilowatt hour for a DC fast charger. And it really only goes up from there. The one thing that I would say, though, to answer that point about whether it'd be cheaper in a gas car or a plug-in hybrid, is in California, I don't think that's the case, because, you know, I've just driven by a dozen gas stations and they're all somewhere between $4.30, 40 cents per gallon, all the way up to $5.50, $6 a gallon almost for gasoline. So you'd have to basically be driving like a Toyota Prius to even come close to the pricing if you were exclusively using a DC fast charger. And I already mentioned, charge point are usually hovering right around 55 to 60, maybe up to 65 to 70 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on site and the time of use. Time of use is the other big factor that you have to deal with in California. And I think the only ones, and now I'm blanking out on where it was, but it was one of the I want to say it was one of the FreeWire chargers, one of the EV Connects at a FreeWire, and it was only like 45 cents. It might have been BP Pulse, actually. And you know, with FreeWire, it makes sense. You're not going to get those demand charges. They could probably afford to charge a little bit less, but you're still, the days of 35 cents per kilowatt hour, I think, are long gone. And I don't know that they'll ever come back again. So at least not in California. It's not what I'm experiencing up here. So
yeah, I'd consider 40 cents per kilowatt hour on the low end nowadays, and up to 60 cents, and maybe I'd pay above that. We are seeing, I think Walter will speak to this as well, but the most expensive site that I'm aware of is well into the 80 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's a Pilot Flying J in one of the New York, maybe both of the New York locations that opened. But Walter, I can pass that to you with your keen eye on the pricing there.
Yeah, so I just, as I mentioned, took the trip up Interstate 81, which goes through the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, all the way up to Winchester, and then I cut over and took Interstate 95 down. And in that trip, as NavyGo Plus Max subscription member, I was able to get dispensed at 25 cents per kilowatt hour, combining my high subscription along with low time of use rates. So I'm an old guy, so I wake up early, so I don't mind filling up my tank early in the morning. And then what I would do is kind of be mindful of my charging during the daytime, and then wait until after dinner, and then get a full tank as I needed in order to continue on. After I did that trip, I ended up in a camping location for several days. So I needed to get completely full up, because when I do car camping in my EV in off the grid locations and use my EV's battery as a house battery, kind of as an RV, I need to get it full up because I'll be there a couple of days. So I did that late at night. And EVgo pricing is not expensive if you're a member and you use it heavily. So I think really what we're seeing are the CPOs trying to drive customers to become subscription members, so they can get the reliability of subscription services, which is really the pricing model that everyone in retail is trying to go to. Is, just something as a service, pizza as a service, or whatever as a service, in order to get that reliable monthly steady income instead of something that fluctuates. So they charge the high rates, but they offer their members discounted rates. That seems to be what's going on. And as Eric said, the days of low cost charging, or Steve, as you said as well, seem to be dissipating. There's still a couple of holdouts there who are doing the quiet subsidy of the EV charging in order to spur on EV adoption, but we seem to be past that now. If there's a charger that just went in near my house, and the CPO is a local convenience store operator, a BP operator, and he makes it free for the first couple of months. And boy, that place is slammed. It's so busy. Yeah, I was there the other day because I would swing by there on my way to a church event, and there was a line of 4 people waiting to pull into one of those 2 stalls for the free dispense. Anyway, I did have an opportunity to speak to the owner of a CPO as they were inaugurating one of their locations. The name of the CPO is Coolum, similar to Eric's channel, but spelled with a K. So unless it is Eric as the angel investor there, I'm not quite sure. But he said, when I asked what they were going to be charging, I think he said 48 because we want to make a little bit of a profit. So I'm not quite sure what that means. I'm assuming when he said 48 because we want to make a little bit of a profit means that he's getting the electricity with the demand charges much less than that, and he's just trying to make a little bit of profit. I think it goes without saying, Mercedes-Benz charging hub sinking $1 million per site into 6 stalls, CPE 250 plus is able to dispense at 400 kilowatts, and selling at 40 cents per kilowatt hour is not going to make much money. And that is likely designed in order to spur on Mercedes customers purchasing electric vehicles versus trying to make a CPO that is overly profitable. Electrify America, I do see creeping up. They're installing new stations, but as was said, they're starting to charge a premium price. And similarly, I think they're trying to play the game of subscription services.
Well, let's see. Somewhere, Jacob, you kind of had said here, I think you made the point in the comments, I'm missing it now, but that Electrify America is coming up on that end of their last investment cycle, right? So the days of them just being a funding penalty are kind of looming large now, and they will need to transition, if they can, to a profitable model, or at least covering their costs. Do you see the price hikes in that vein, or is that just natural inflation that was going to happen one way or another?
I think the price hikes, they just they did them last year, so I think it was maybe to help pay for the failing hardware or something, and maybe also the free charging plans also had something to do with it, because I guess those started to be utilized a lot more, so they had to just raise the prices. But I also just checked on all the Tesla sites in New Mexico, and with the subscription, none are more than 40 cents kilowatt hour, so they are quite cheaper than Electrify America. In that regard, the Tesla charging in my state.
Yeah, and I was going to say, though, on that point that Jacob just made, because I think, Walter, you and I had chatted about this too on your channel, is I think there's some amount of these higher prices that are being offset by people who have premium access. So you look at the GM Energy EVgo sites that pilot Flying J, 69, 79, 80 cents a kilowatt hour. Oh my God, it's so expensive. But then you look and Cadillac Lyric owners are charging for free. So you have to kind of start to account for, on the whole, what are these CPOs actually charging? And we know that Electrify America has a vast array of different free charging programs. And so even though their prices have been going up, what they're actually recouping from those charging sessions might not be as much as it was before they had all of these free charging programs. So I think that's also something, just from a big picture perspective, to keep in mind when we're looking at the pricing of the networks.
Those are starting to go away, though. You're definitely seeing that same effect of people whose 2 or 3 year pricing, a complimentary plan has run out, going back, and they obviously haven't been looking at the price, because it's pretty clearly displayed there when you go up and start plugging in. But I don't think people look at it, because they're showing their first bill of $30-$40, because they would just leave the car and let it go from 10% to 90-95% and go, this is not as cheap as I could.
That could be the ironic twist, though, as Electrify America ends their free charging access, we could actually see their prices start to go back down again.
So we had wanted to, we won't stay all night on pricing, but it certainly starts to speak in the realm of competition, because with more and more networks coming online, more and more providers, and multiple locations kind of getting into that California scenario of you can get off at most interstate exits and there's going to be a provider, but in the very near future there's going to be 2, 3, maybe 4 providers within, even if it's not that exit, the next exit, or some interstate plaza, a lot of different places that you can start to choose. Where does pricing start to fit into the CPO's strategy, versus they could previously charge, well, for the moment even can charge what they want, as in those Electrify America examples where you have to go there, that's the only game in town. Where do we start seeing this as a, right, I need to undercut the opposition, right, I need to Walter's point, really sell my subscription so the price can be high, flat rate for anyone who just turns up or uses a card, but if you come in, you show me that you shop in my store, or you buy tchotchkes, whatever it is, you start to get a discount on that side. Jacob, do you want to go into that one a little bit? See if you can, obviously maybe it wouldn't make a difference at the moment, but in future, if you have a few different choices, how would pricing kind of factor into your decision where to charge?
Yeah, well, I would have to see. Well, the subscription pricing is something that's specific, because some of those places don't even offer subscription license. Some of those smaller ones, but also the GM Energy, those sites there, they don't even abide by the EVgo pricing. So you can't even have a subscription if you wanted to. It's only GM. So I guess we'll see. But I think some of the cities, Lordsburg, they're going to get, there's already the pilot Flying J going in, and then hopefully the Tesla Supercharger sometime in the next year. So I guess we'll see at that area. So there'll be 3 different Electrify America, Tesla, and pilot Flying J. So if it were me as a consumer, a driver, I would probably decide based on which subscription I already pay for, and then just the cost, the lowest cost, pretty much. And beyond that, I guess I would see about the amenities. And obviously, if I'm arriving at a high state charge, maybe I'll take a slower charger instead of a faster one. But yeah, and then like some of the pricing for a subscription, so Electrify America is pretty good, only $7 a month. It's easy to hold that even when you don't travel that much. But the Tesla Supercharger, that one's a $13 a month subscription, kind of like the maximum EVgo plan. So you really have to bust out the calculator and see how many kilowatt hours you use on each of those networks. That was another point that you could figure in your calculations. But hopefully the competition would force them to lower their prices, but it would have to be within the same city or within the same exit if there aren't any nearby like larger towns or anything like that.
Let's see, Eric, your mic's off. You have something to say.
I was in the ready position. No, yeah, I look at it. There's two ways I look at it, right? As an EV owner, I've just never really paid that much attention, right? In the sense that I figure it's all going to come out in the wash, and maybe this is just me being a relic of a bygone era where there were still a bunch of free chargers roaming around and whatnot. But um, I just build my trips around me. And so it has so much more to do as an individual EV owner. My choices, prices way down the list in terms of, is it a nice location? Are the chargers reliable? Are there things on the site that I want to use or do? Right. And so, yeah, someplace like In-N-Out might get a lot of my money, even if they're charging 20 cents more per kilowatt hour, because, the charger is located at a premium location that I want to be using. And I think Walter has kind of made this point about the EV Goes at the Pilot Flying J. These are some of the best travel stops, right? You see the same thing with Buc-ee's. These are some of the best travel stops on the road. You almost don't care, right? Like, as long as it's somewhat reasonable what you're paying, you're not being fleeced in some way, you're going to stop there and use them. But I do think my one area where these CPOs, I think, are either winning or losing in terms of their pricing is not in the price itself, but in how simple it is. And I think that's where EVgo is a huge loser, right? In terms of their pricing is probably the most complex, the most convoluted, and the most difficult to parse. Whereas someplace like, Tesla, where they win out really big, is it's very simple. It's, you pay our price, you plug in, and you charge, right? And it's almost it's too transparent to the point where I don't think a lot of Tesla owners actually even pay attention to the pricing. I think they literally just plug in and they know it's going to work, and they know that they're a member, and they know that they get the lowest rates possible, and so they don't even really think about it too much. And that's where I think the networks that are going to start winning over are the ones that are going to make a very simple pricing model that is overall, you just take a 10,000 foot view and you say, wow, they're a reasonably priced network. I'm just going to charge there because, on the whole, it's going to be an easy, seamless experience. And I know that they're not overcharging me, right? I know that they're charging competitive rates. So the networks that can do that, I think, are the networks that are going to get really far ahead.
There is an elephant in the room, if I can. There's a bit of two narratives developing, where one is a CPO that is kind of on a mission to help encourage people to adopt electric vehicles, so they kind of hold their prices down. Then there's the other one who's trying to capitalize on EV adoption by actually selling electricity and trying to earn a living, and it's being discussed with EA and whatnot. And IONNA is getting ready to spend some serious bank on canopy sites in large numbers. And if I understand correctly, their mission is to encourage people to adopt electric vehicles. So we could easily be looking at a brand new nationwide CPO going gangbusters, putting in sites all over the place at a very reasonable dispensing rate. And if so, that is going to be very difficult. That'll have massive waves across the entire industry in order to help stabilize the prices. So that's really where I'm hoping things will go, because, as Eric says, the cost is very complicated. And as Steve, you mentioned, I track Pilot Flying J. They're charging variable pricing that fluctuates per week. It's very complicated to keep track of. There's a location in Georgia, Tifton, Georgia, where there's going to be a canopy Pilot Flying J that's likely going to be charging more, immediately next to a Circle K that won't have a canopy. Same number of chargers, similar dispensing rate, 180 versus 350, but whatever, right off the interstate. And if I'm an EV driver and I'm getting off the Interstate 75 in order to charge, where do I turn my car? To the location that has a canopy and some nicer amenities, I guess, that charges more, or to the Circle K that doesn't have the canopy but charges less? And I guess it would depend on the weather or something. I'm not quite sure.
Well, that may be, I would have that same situation as I go west into New York. That Castleton on Hudson, the first Pilot Flying J in New York State, is about 81 cents per kilowatt hour last time I checked, which the canopy is going to be a big deal in winter or rain, in fall, whatever it is. But just down the road, maybe another mile, is an Evolve New York site, which has that utility kind of buffered pricing, and they're trying to keep it, good for ratepayers and give them bang for their buck. That's 45 cents per kilowatt hour. So yeah, in winter, okay, maybe I'll just stump up the extra and move on and find a cheaper one later on. But in summer, don't really care. It's a gas station. Pilot Flying J has 24/7, so maybe my time of travel would be a factor. But this time of year, I'm not going to the one that's going to charge me 81 cents a kilowatt hour. I'll go to the 45 cents and pay for my next charge before I add another 200 miles or so. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to quickly jump into IONNA here, because I got a little bit of footage from the Houston, Texas site from a friend at Pangaea Charging. He's Anup Parikh, and he lives in the area. But let me put the video up here just quickly. Try and cast your mind forward and see the facilities that Walter was talking about from this kind of what has to be a pokey little site, to be honest. It was not going to be that. That was the former go-to station.
Yeah, the rechargery, huh? Yeah.
But look at this. I mean, that's not a big place, right? It's kind of a small lot. You'll see here at the end, there's a Starbucks in the background there, so you do have an opportunity to kind of there's your facilities. But I'm having trouble from that particular site, unless they do some very, very interesting engineering or multi-level chicanery, imagining how that's going to be a kind of $1.5 million charging hub. It's not something that I am gifted with the foresight to kind of see at the moment. So I'm really intrigued to see how that looks when they finish it up.
I could see you could easily fit something like if you're familiar with the EVgo Baker site, you could very easily fit something like that in there, where it's a single central column of chargers with solar panels over the top. And then it's full pull through because you're coming along the side in either direction. So I could easily see them fitting a decent number of chargers with decent access there.
Lounges, amenities, probably not so much.
Yeah, that I'm not sure about. Where would those go on that lot?
In Houston, this isn't like there's not a lot of space invisible there. This is built up around that area. It's just an interesting aside. So thank you to Anup for kind of sending that across. I was really interested to see what that looks like away from the photos. And but even the previous purveyor, the go-to station, who was looking to build it before, had a pretty significant canopy in there and an interesting render. So obviously, it's been identified as a potentially good hub site. It's just it's going to be interesting to compare that when we actually finally have some construction, which is supposed to be this time next month.
It's July. They should have been turning dirt already.
I think it was August 1st, wasn't it? They said, and then they was going to be done by Halloween.
My apologies. I thought they
were. I mean, we're close here. It's looming.
Well, yeah, they did say construction was closed by the end of October, right? Was the target. So, well, and I was going to say, though, Steve, too, just one last thought on that is there's another irony, I think, with the pricing, that I think the nicer chargers that go in initially could start to see the lower rates sooner, right? It's sort of that buy once, cry once mentality, where if you're putting in a solar canopy, you're by default going to be paying less for energy than your competitors. But you're going to have nicer charger. If you have nicer chargers, right, they're going to be protected, so you're going to be spending less on upkeep, right? So all of this is going to snowball in a way that these nicer charging sites with more stalls that go in initially, if you have 10 stalls, you're going to draw more customers than you are if you're only putting in 4 stalls. And so these nicer sites, if they put the investment in up front, I see them paying off sooner. And as a result, those more competitive prices can be passed on to the consumer earlier than they could at a less compelling site that maybe has more repair costs and higher energy costs.
I had an opportunity this week to speak to an EVgo technician, and he agreed with what you're saying and have said in other videos, Eric, about the canopies protecting the chargers. He said the screens will only last about a year and a half with direct sunlight when they orientate them towards the sun. You got about a year and a half of use out of those things before they basically just disintegrate. And you put a canopy over it, then you're increasing the service life of the equipment.
Yeah, and Jacob, you must have been kind of across some of that in New Mexico, the heat and the direct sunlight on those chargers. I think you've seen probably as much wear and tear as anybody on your travels. Are you starting to feel like that's going to be planned in as they start to have these more modern charging hubs to protect that equipment as well as the people and just get that shade in place?
At some of the sites, it looks like the plans were that, but I'd say less than 20% of them. I think it really depends on which hardware you select. The screen burn-in, I haven't really seen that too bad, only the BTC. Some of the ABB, those ones are just like laggy screens that Electron America uses with those ones there, but I guess it just depends on the equipment that's used. But I would agree that a site that has more amenities, that one would have more traffic, and hopefully the steady business would let them decrease the prices eventually.
Well, Jacob, you mentioned BTC Power, and I don't even know if a canopy is going to save those screens. Like I have not seen a single BTC Power model that didn't have screen failures of some sort, within the first year of them going in. And in fact, even Electrify America's new BTC Power units are already suffering from screen failures. So, and they've been around for less than 6 to 8 months now. So.
Okay, I'm going to finish out the pricing section with viewer comments, and then we'll move on very, very briefly, I guess, to competition, which we've touched upon a little bit already. But Platform Fanatic saying charged at an EVgo near Seattle, which was 66 cents per kilowatt hour to charge in the afternoon. Also paid an annoying usage fee,
which are lifted for subscriptions.
Session fee, right? I think to Walter's point, this is the kind of prevailing feeling of EVgo, is it is super expensive because if you're off plan, you just plug in and it's probably the middle of the day. Usually you're going to be on peak because that's when people tend to charge. It is expensive, but then if you go into the real kind of guts of the pricing, there are times and places where it can be cheaper to charge, but it's just, I don't think that gets through to the majority of people unless they really are using EVgo regularly. So maybe that's an episode in itself, but we'd really get into the plans there. John Ross up in Ontario, V3s are at 52 cents per kilowatt hour. For members, 64 cents per kilowatt hour plus the tax, I think that is. Yeah, and there are some really odd examples up in Canada of this electric circuit they're actually quite reasonably priced, but they break it down by time and hour, and it gets into it has that EVgo problem of just being so impenetrable as a pricing sheet that you really can't tell exactly how complicated it's going to get. Robert has a ChargePoint site at 29 Palms Community Center, still at 30 cents per kilowatt hour. So enjoy them while they last, because I'm sure it won't be that much. But maybe it speaks to the ChargePoint kind of model of the site host setting the pricing, and either they don't know what they've got or they don't want to garage people. So you get a little bit of benefit of the individual independent site hosts with that.
Yeah.
Crazy Postman has a Chevrolet dealership with 55 cents per kilowatt hour. Brings me on to my really brief story of the two dealerships. The one that saved me was at, not saved me, but, bridge the gap to upstate New York was at about 45 cents per kilowatt hour. A new auto unit, really, really good. There was one down the road just before the border with New York in Pennsylvania. It was charging, hold your breath, $3.50 per kilowatt hour. I don't think they had transaction fee or session fee, so that was a saving grace. But there were a few people checking in on PlugShare. You can go and check it out. I think it's Muncie, Pennsylvania. That was just
the decimal point in the wrong place, or what?
I was wondering if it was 35 cents per kilowatt hour, and someone just screwed up the data entry.
Sadly, that is still not the most that I've heard a station charge.
Where's your highest?
There was one in, I think it was Ohio. That they were charging that one that got really notorious really quick because they were charging $5 It was either $5 a minute or $5 a kilowatt hour on a 62 kilowatt
And somebody
charger.
changed the plug share listing to "Do not charge here" instead of what the title was, doing a public service. Andy Getch has FPL, as Florida mentioned, at 30 cents per kilowatt hour, the rate they started with a couple of years ago when their sites were Dieselgate funded. Doesn't expect it to continue very long, but FPL is coming out of this session very positively. I think great sites, good coverage, making progress in
locations.
Florida,
Yeah.
and reasonable pricing by the sound of it. Not discussed in this video, but I've seen places charging 50 cents per kilowatt hour for level 2 charging. Right, there's level 2s on a different kind of cadence. You would expect that to be much closer to residential rates, right?
You would hope. That's a sentiment that I've seen from a lot of people is, they would expect level 2 to be much closer to local utility rates.
Mm-hmm. But they can get away with it because of no competition, AB says, to follow up. And Ardy's comment just there, or Jacob's comment, sorry, seeing the comments titles. A lot of hotels with AC charging similar prices to DC charging, which is pretty egregious when you think about it, unless they're really giving you a deal on the room in some way, which I doubt it. Scott on the New York State Thruway pointing out that those Apple Green electric chargers are expensive. I think they were the first that bridged into 60 plus cents per kilowatt hour. But then they're also at the interstate service plazas. So like gasoline, you're expecting to pay a little bit higher for the convenience and getting on and off very quickly. And probably a good point to kind of finish it with, because it is offset. We always have to point out that DC fast charging isn't the norm for a lot of people. Yes, some people who are rideshare or can't charge at home may have to use DC fast charging as their main source of electrons, but a lot of people are charging at home or at work on the cheaper residential rates. So usually that should be cheaper, and you can charge sometimes as well to maintain the price.
It does look like Mark has an update on that most expensive charger in America.
Let's see if I'm missing it.
It's at the bottom. Yeah,
there we go. Yeah,
so
Mark has been. It's now $10 an hour in Sudbury, Ohio. Okay, I guess that works then. If you're in my car, that works, unless it's throttled, which is a whole other ball game. And then Crazy Postman, did they at least give you dinner before you got? Sometimes they will buy you dinner, but only at a hotel probably. All right, so really briefly, let's crank into the competition side. We had cost, we had coverage, and now we have the competition, where the networks that are coming up, and certainly those that are getting NEVI funding in some states without having too much of a track record. Jacob, what are you seeing from not just the ones that are already there, but the ones that you're looking to maybe fill gaps that are in your state or on travel routes that you frequently take?
Yeah, well, I would say hopefully the privately funded ones, the ones that didn't get the NEVI funding, hopefully they'll go forward, and some of them will be able to use their own funds or maybe find other government grants or other state or local grants to be able to fund those ones, because that equipment looks pretty good. There was one that was going to use the new Loop hardware, 360 kilowatt dispensers. And like I said, the Alpitronic will hopefully be coming soon to some of the Travel Centers of America and other brands in their portfolio. I think Petro Travel Centers is another one. So I still hold hope for that. And still with Tesla, but there are still areas in our state where, here in New Mexico, where Tesla has largely ignored the southeast part of the state and off interstate corridors. They still haven't done that yet. So yeah, but I think I would sour a little bit on ChargePoint, unfortunately. Had a conversation with someone there. It looks like they're taking a different strategy, that they're more of a hands-off approach. Here, they're mostly just selling the equipment, and that's it. There are a few stations here in the state that they're not at the best speed. They have 250 kilowatt software locked at a gas station, and they basically, after they sell the hardware, that's it. That's really up to the individual station owner to set the pricing and the charging speed as well. They don't like to do any real follow-up. So once the hardware is sold, then they just pretty much take a hands-off approach. And I think they need to have a better approach, and especially because they usually sell to one-off businesses It's not like they can coordinate that other way, saying, here we have a fleet of chargers and we'll work with you to install. It's usually just a one-to-one relationship. And if they don't want to do the follow-up, then that's an issue.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that's the thing. Yeah, the thing with ChargePoint too is I think we benefit in California from a lot of the sites here are actually owned and operated by ChargePoint because there's part of the CEC grant funds that went in. But I also think that they probably are focusing a little bit too on their commercial business too, which maybe to the detriment to the private customer. But in terms of the networks in my region up here in Northern California, I would say like it's the smaller gas station sites that are starting to impress me. Where we've always in California, I feel like we've had this benefit where a lot of our sites are going in at gas stations or travel plazas or typical travel locations. So when people complain about like Electrify America at all the Walmarts, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I kind of have to go out of the way to find an Electrify America at a Walmart. But BP Pulse has been really picking up. I visited that ChargePoint site, but that's an older one. But right next door, we're finally getting Maverick, Adventure's first stop travel plazas into Northern California. They're adding, at least at some locations, now I'm just blanking out. It's FreeWire Boost. They're adding FreeWire Boost chargers. BP Pulse is also using the FreeWire Boost chargers, and then of course Electric Era is now adding those Signet with the sort of the power backup or the battery backup Signet units. So we're seeing a lot of these smaller niche gas stations getting chargers, 1 of, 2 of, 3 of. But that's enough when you have a dozen gas stations in a 40-mile strip that each have a couple of chargers. That starts to build this sort of robust redundancy within the network that we really like to see, or at least that I really like to see. But yeah, I wanted to call out BP Pulse because even they have a new one coming online, and we've just seen what BP is doing just in general with their hardware. So they're kind of one that I'm watching in Northern California as well to see how much they start to expand.
I have trouble calling out a particular network that's expanding. I'm certainly seeing Flow have a bigger presence in New England. That's coming down from that. Maybe some of these are to the regional point again. ChargePoint being strong in your area, Eric, because they're there, and that's where they're kind of able to make the contacts and build out. Flow is based in Canada, in the Eastern Canada kind of region. So they started to come down into Vermont first, certainly a little bit of a presence in Massachusetts now. And I could see them getting into New York and starting to build out that Northeast presence, maybe even down in Michigan in the kind of upper parts of that state. And then it's bizarre, again, going back to dealerships. So just purely because of the power level that some of them are putting in, Ford dealers especially are really going kind of great guns. Again, they don't build out the network because this is individual dealerships, and it really depends on how into electric vehicles they are. You may go to one Ford dealer that has, some old, sub 100 kilowatt stations that aren't going to do you much good on a road trip. But then, there's others there with the ChargePoint Express Plus in. The one that I went to the other day with the 180 kilowatt Autel was a Jeep dealership, which is, there's no EVs there what they can charge at the moment with that connection. So it was great for me, in the Ioniq 5, just cranking out the last couple of 100 miles at, in 15-minute charge session. But the dealerships seem to be, more and more they're on my radar. I'm starting to look at them where I previously would have done what Jacob does and hide dealerships because it's just, they're in the way essentially. They're old equipment. They're the 25 kilowatt Chevy dealerships from the good old days of, bridging your gaps across upstate New York here. But that's not the case anymore. Some of these have actually compelling hardware, and it's really just a case of, can you pass the time? Is there something else near it? Something, that qualifies as an amenity to make it worthwhile stopping there. But they're filling some gaps for me, certainly. Walter, we didn't hit you yet. You have your pick of networks down there.
Yeah, so the two that are really butting up against each other are Circle K and Pilot Flying J in the Southeast, and it's really getting kind of ruthless. They're almost going at the same exits. There's a location on Interstate 95 called Kingsland, Georgia, and it's a very popular spot because once you cross into Jacksonville in Florida, the cost for hotels dramatically goes up. So Kingsland is one of these places where people from the Northeast who are going into Florida will stop. and stay for the night. And there's lots of inexpensive hotels. And on one exit, Pilot Flying J and Circle K are like right next to each other. Now, someone chimed into my channel in the chat in the comments saying, why don't they put up a sign talking about the kilowatt hour pricing? And sooner or later, I was at a convenience store charging up, and I walked in, and it was a hot day, so I bought myself an ice cream and was chit-chatting with the people there, and then I got myself a drink. And sooner or later, people are going to figure out that if there's DC fast chargers on both sides of the road, and they could advertise their pricing and get more people with that long dwell time sitting in their parking lot and buying things from their convenience store, they're going to put up the sign, similarly to what's going on in gas. And I don't know why no one's thought of that. Yes, I guess we haven't hit the proliferation of the build out where there's ubiquitous things on exits like there are in portions of California. But sooner or later, someone's going to figure that out. And as you say, that will just start additional price wars where it's a race to the bottom. And hopefully that will happen soon. I'm seeing a lot of exits on interstates for road trippers have multiple stations.
For sure, I think that's the big kind of side benefit of the competition. We talk about the different networks and get obsessed in the how they're building their sites, but the fact that they have sites and are at the same place as somewhere that is already got an existing site, they're going to have to really start thinking about upping their game. Whoever was there before, it's not the only game in town anymore. It's time to start. Do you have the amenities? Do you have the facilities that people want? Do you have the canopy? Whatever it is that people are starting to think about,
Yeah, a little bit further up on 95 in North Carolina, there is an EA station, there's a Pilot Flying J station, and then there's this new Monster Circle K station, all within very close proximity to each other. And it's like whoever built last is the one that's now the flavor of the month sort of thing. And EA was first, Pilot Flying J was second, and Circle K was third. And I guess they're just going to keep leapfrogging each other until and the consumer wins here.
So we're going to have to quickly go to the comments, then I will shut us down because we're impinging. I hope no one has to get up early because it's a holiday now, so you will hopefully allow us a few more minutes. But FreeWire is all over the comments, so need to make sure we cover that before we go. Has anyone had much success with FreeWire or other battery all-in-one solutions? Most of the plug shares I see are from people with low charge speeds due to depleted batteries. Let me just go through all the comments and we can cover this in one swoop. Robert Brigham, is FreeWire still a viable charger supplier? Site in SoCal was left unrepaired. Larry mentioned that FreeWire is shut down as far as we've talked about. And Rob also says the one FreeWire boost unit in West Tennessee off I-40 worked well, got 74 kilowatts. So, I mean, we do know they're in that restructuring phase. We haven't heard a lot because obviously there's nobody there to answer the calls or to put out press releases, but you have to assume that we talk about them pretty much every show. Someone has to go in there and pick this up, right? I mean, there may be hardware considerations, but it seems like there's some value there, and there's already, to our point about coverage, they're in all of our areas. Jacob, are they in your area?
They are not, and neither is Circle K either. So we're still waiting for them to come down from Colorado.
Yeah.
Walter, Eric, what are you thinking about FreeWire's position?
So, I've always had concerns with FreeWire because I didn't feel like they were the most reliable, right? Like we've seen a lot of issues with their reliability, and I thought, okay, maybe growing pains, new hardware, a lot of fixes, but that does also, if they were bulletproof, right, like the Cybertruck, then it would be a different story. If FreeWire went out of business, you'd just have this reliable charger sitting in your lot, no big deal. But with a lot of these providers who picked up FreeWire, I think that is a concern. If they're not able to provide technical support, if they're not able to fix these chargers, then there is a real problem with stranded assets. And you're not just talking about a charger, you're talking about what, like a 160 kilowatt hour battery pack in those things. They're just a massive battery. but they filled an important niche that not a lot of hardware fills. And so I mentioned that SK unit that Electric Era is using with the battery backup, that might be able to fill the niche. I think as Joule has a similar one with the battery. So there are some all-in-one battery charger solutions that could potentially fill that niche. But FreeWire made a big impact, and a lot of networks picked them up, and they've deployed in a lot of units. So it is a concern to me that they're going to be, how much they'll be kept up from a technician perspective. But as a company, I'd like to see them survive, but it makes me wonder, they seemed like they were selling a lot of units. So if they weren't able to keep their heads afloat, even selling all those units, then I don't know.
Afloat, is that another Cybertruck pun? As it's a boat? People appreciating the Cybertruck lols.
I can say the closest Circle K DC fast charger built to my house that's getting ready to be turned on has two FreeWire 200 boost chargers linked together. And when you link two of those suckers together, you've got a pretty compelling offering, especially if you tie it to a hefty grid connection, which likely Circle K is going to do. Once that site lights up, I'm going to go there and check it out. I'm looking forward to that. But they were partially funded, and I'm not sure the details of it, but they're partially funded by British Petroleum. And I know British Petroleum kind of pulled back on their DC fast charger implementation, so maybe the funding dried up, and that's what caught them with their pants down, and they were just kind of, I don't really know the details, but as Eric says, they should be a viable company, and maybe just temporarily there was a point where they just need to do a restructure. But when large companies like that are doing heavy investment, even GM just recently had a press release about partnering with FreeWire. So when all those big companies are reaching out and doing partnerships and joint ventures, you would think that it would just be a matter of time before they come back to life. So hopefully so.
We hope to see it.
Yeah, I think they just took the wrong business model, unfortunately. I think they were trying to sell units directly, and then later on they pivoted towards more of a land lease, which I think is more of a better solution for small businesses and stuff like that. That's also what Electric Era is doing. They're doing land leases. The only bad thing is that they are targeting larger installations. I believe their minimum is 5 stalls. I think it's like 5 to 8 parking lots spaces that you have to provide to them. So that might not work, unfortunately, in the smaller towns or mountain getaways and stuff like that, where you don't need a large installation. But otherwise, I think Electric Era is a pretty good battery buffered solution, and hopefully they'll take the place of FreeWire, and maybe they'll be able to downsize their sites to fit in some of the smaller locations that you don't need more than like 2 to 4.
And there is one in your area, right? It's planned coming soon.
Coming soon. It's unfortunately about 6 months later than it was anticipated, but yeah, should be coming.
The story of most DC fast charging, unfortunately. Okay, I think we're clearly over time, and this will probably be our longest one yet, but we did cover all the topics, so well done, everybody. Give yourself a round of applause. Jacob, we have you, as I mentioned, on X and YouTube, RD Penguin 1. I have a video to go and watch. I think you just released something on Comma, self-driving. Is that correct?
Yeah, driver assistance, and then coming tomorrow or in the next few days, my very first road trip from Albuquerque to Las Cruces.
Excellent. So we will look forward to that. That's holiday watching for everybody. And I've got to catch up on your other Comma videos. I think I watched one of them, but I need to go back and look at what I can do in my Ioniq 5. Eric, over at the News Coolum channel, you are
I'm still
cooking.
Yeah, I'm still hiding. Well, I am cooking. It's like 104 right now, but yeah, I'm still hiding in the background. I just got 105 kilowatt hours of battery pack in for my Ranger Electrics, so I've got some work on my hands there.
So there's more forward action than just Q2 EV sales.
Oh yeah,
Still happening up there. Excellent. And Walter at the Network Architect channel, you are never not busy. Aside from the very many weekly updates? Any road trips you want to call out that we should watch coming from you?
None currently. I'll be stationary for the foreseeable future. I just switched jobs, so I don't have any vacation.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we'll still appreciate your weekly updates and the site reviews that are still filtering out. As I mentioned, I am in upstate New York this week, and if you're anywhere near Geneva, New York, you can catch this event over at the Finger Lakes Welcome Center, 3 to 6 p.m., and we'll be there a little bit after as well. So definitely come on over if you have any time or inclination. And for my own part, I will be traveling a very long way towards the end of this month, but I'm going to do a quick update video on that later this week. So you'll have some summer travel updates for what is going to be a pretty epic road trip, I hope, coming up towards the end of July, early August. So keep following the channels. All the links will be down below in the comments. Check out Jacob's latest adventures in New Mexico and with his EV6. Thanks for joining us, Jacob. Great to get the update on your area and regional DC fast charging. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate your time and have a very happy 4th if you celebrate. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.